Welcome to SHOWstudio. It's our penultimate panel discussion of the Haute Couture season. It's a lovely discussion because we've got a very sort of couture theme going on around the studio. I've got amazing Stephen Doherty behind me depicting the looks from Paris onto the back walls. So we've got Schiaparelli, Dior, Chanel, and he's going to be working on Margiela behind us. And we're also sat on the fabric that Nick Knight shot the Christian Dior, J'adore Dior perfume on. So it's all very kind of Parisian, very, very couture theme, which is lovely. I've got a fabulous set of panellists with me to unpick what's going on at the Maison Martin Margiela Haute Couture show. But before we kick off and start discussing the brand and looking at what they've done for the season, it'd be great if you guys could just introduce yourselves, starting with you, Harriet.
I'm Harriet Quick, I'm a journalist and author.
I'm Belle Jacobs and I'm a freelance journalist.
And I'm Heather Sproat, I'm one of the tutors on BA Fashion at Central St Martin's.
I want to start a little bit by talking about what's going on in Paris in general at the moment, because I know that you just got back from Paris and also I know that you've worked in couture ateliers. So let's talk about what the vibe is like in Paris when it is haute couture, both sort of behind the scenes but also when you're watching the shows. Is it quite magical being there?
Yeah, I always think that the streets have been shampooed, you know, the air's been perfumed. It just sort of moves into a different field. And I think at the shows you're really aware of the presence of power and money in quite an incredible way. And the pace is more gentle than ready to wear. Everything's more mannered and more courteous. That suits the field of haute couture.
Yeah. Do we wish there was a bit more of that kind of slow fashion in general? Because, you know, as you say, the pace is very different. Haute couture, it seems the one time where you can go to the shows and you can kind of breathe and you can take things in, and I guess that reflects the amount of craft that's gone into each piece. Did you find it must be a very special thing to have worked on?
I mean, I think the kind of slow fashion idea actually fits in with haute couture really well, because what people forget is although you're paying an awful lot of money for these garments, there's no seam allowances in them. They're made to last a lifetime, so you can go back. If you've lost weight, they'll take them in for you. If you've put on weight, they'll let them out for you. So the idea that you could have a garment which really would last you a lifetime is kind of really interesting.
And I think people sometimes that we've talked a lot about that on these panels, this idea that there are people that buy couture and that shopper sometimes I think gets left out. You know, when you're watching the shows, it's easy to get caught up in the theatre of it all. But yeah, there is this sort of interesting couture shopper. What's your take on what's been going on in Paris so far, Belle? Have you been following the shows?
Not that much. I did get the impression that there is a sea change going on in couture, isn't there, about its relevance in modern day society. And I think it was a conversation particularly started last season by Karl Lagerfeld and the sparkly trainers. So I think it was interesting to see the shows now, to see how that conversation was continued. From what I've seen, there are more casual shapes, so shapes that you normally associate with everyday wear rather than the fairy tale princess. That's pretty much the impression I'm getting. Some of the shows really fit into that. Some of them I'm expecting Margiela to introduce more of those shapes. There's a part of me that really loves the fairy tale princess thing, but I think we do have to move away from that in order for couture to remain relevant. There's and I've definitely been through this stage where I find couture very alienating because of the prices involved. But obviously I move on that stage because I see the value that couture has in maintaining industries that are so precious, like the lissage and the feathers and pearls, and just the craftsmanship is phenomenal. So yeah, I'm loving couture at the moment. I will never be able to afford it in this lifetime, but you know, it's great to see it moving as well.
Let's talk about that idea of sort of relevant couture, because I think, as you said, that's very appropriate given that we're going to be discussing the Margiela show, and because it's not, I know everyone is having a moment because of, you know, Raf being sort of in squads at Dior and also having the Chanel trainers, as you mentioned, but I think this idea of sort of everyday shapes or even everyday fabrics, or as we have at Margiela, found materials being used in couture, it's not completely new. Let's talk a little bit about who have been the pioneers of that. Obviously we could talk about Jean-Paul Gaultier with denim on a couture runway. Who do we think's pioneered kind of relevant couture? Is there any favourite moments? Heather, I'll go to you. No one wants to answer.
Don't come to me. You stumped me. I mean, I think that couture offers the opportunity for designers really to say what they can be, what the possibilities are. I mean, that's, you know, it might not actually generating sales what it costs to support all of these craftsmen and artisans. But it offers the designers the absolute possibility to express themselves in terms of the purest form of kind of fashion as art. And then a very kind of elite group of women generally get to wear it. So I mean, there's quite a difficult conversation, particularly where we are in the world at the moment, and the fact that we are so aware of what's going on globally. To kind of face up to that, and I don't know, going forward in history, will this moment or will these moments be kind of remembered? I mean, look at kind of what happened in the 20s with Paul Poiret, everything becoming so extravagant and then kind of imploding.
Because it is true. I mean, I don't think couture customers number about 300, 400. There's not a lot of women, and that we do live in a world where, because we're so aware of, I hate to sound, this is a bit of a downer, but there's a lot of poverty in the world, so there does feel something a little bit grotesque about spending 50 grand, 200 grand on a single piece of clothing. I haven't quite got my head around that one yet. I think when I thought about it, I thought, my father once pointed out to me, a lot of the technology that surrounds us comes from space research, So we're spending millions on space research, we're building rockets that may not go, and some of that technology is filtering down to our everyday lives, and I kind of feel that couture is kind of the space research of fashion, because some of that filters down, and you see it in the ready-to-wear show, and then you maybe see it in collaborations with you see it, and it does come to us eventually.
So do you think we should focus on it in two ways, like both as something that is sold and worn, but also, as you said, just as this kind of chance to experiment and chance to kind of
and to maintain valuable skills.
But then going back to this idea of what we see at Margiela, do you think that there is something kind of then ironic to see found clothing being put on a couture runway as Margiela do, or denim, or ordinary fabrics? Is there something like, is it slightly bad taste when it's going to be bought for so much money, or is that treating it too simplistically?
I quite like it. I love the idea of found fabrics. I love the idea of taking something that's old and valuing it. And it's a very emotional thing when you get an old piece of fabric and you put it in a special way. You're sort of paying tribute to all of its history, to the people who made it 50, 80 years ago. To what it's actually, I think it's quite wonderful. Denim, I'm not so sure.
I think also as a couture customer, you might be viewing what the House of Margiela is doing, but actually if you went in as a client, it's your prerogative and as an haute couture customer to say, really love this silhouette, but I would like it in silk, or I would like it in this. So actually maybe some of the found fabrics that are used within the show presentation offer some ideas and some inspirations, but the literal the way the client might buy it might be in a very different way.
That's interesting.
And couture also offers the chance for designers to do the most incredible fabric developments, time-consuming, extremely well researched and innovative. There's so much of that which filters through, that they really can be kind of very exploratory in the way that they treat fabrics and fabric manipulations and printing and all those kind of things. They're pushing groundbreaking techniques, I think, in couture far more than ready to wear, and then ideas can just pop. There's the luxury of having a longer time to think and to research and to develop things.
Has there anything that's come along in recent seasons that you've seen in the couture that you've been, any techniques or innovations that you've been particularly inspired by? I know we talk a lot about Iris van Herpen's work here, but even just on sort of some of the houses that are showing this season.
I mean, I think there were, if you looked really carefully at the Chanel show, that it's very difficult to appreciate when you're just looking at images on a screen what's gone on to make those fabric pieces. That they've got fabric, it's been taken to pieces, they've then rewoven certain parts, it's been re-embroidered. Unless you actually go up and you look really closely, you can't appreciate how much time has gone into preparing some of those samples just for a tiny little patch here or something. So yeah, I mean, Chanel, maybe possibly not so innovative, but beautiful. The Giambattista Valley, all of the chiffon cutouts and wisteria. I mean, you know, angelic and dreamlike. I mean, it was, and you're not, you know, you do a little bit, but you're just not going to get that kind of emotional reaction necessarily from ready-to-wear pieces.
Would you guys agree with that? Do you think there is something more moving about watching a couture show?
Yeah, because I think it's based on really projecting a dream and a fantasy. And it's very orchestrated, and also within each design there's so many ideas that might be peeled out over several looks within a ready-to-wear collection. And I think it has to have that elevation. I think on the technology point, I think it's interesting actually to look inside the designs, because I think a lot of the technology has really transformed the way things can fit with corsetry, very, you know, technical structures going on that can be absolutely feather light, you know, it's magical. And, you know, many years ago it being quite a heavy garment, and now you can create these things that just float
there is a sense
feel
of lightness.
beautiful and still give you that structure.
That's interesting. Let's talk a bit specifically about the House of Margiela, because I'm interested. Is it a house that you guys have all followed for a while? Do you remember any particular moments where a first Margiela show that you went to, or when you first came across the brand, or first piece that you bought? Or, we've talked a little bit before about Margiela. Do you remember first sort of being impressed?
I do remember going to a Margiela ready-to-wear show in a subway in the north of Paris, and various other shows where you were given a letter as an invitation. It was always somewhere obscure, hard to get to. It was often darkly lit, and the assistants would be there in white coats, sort of ushering in people. So it kind of folded back on the whole idea of the hierarchy of the show seating, that people would just be there and be almost part of the show. It'd be very up close. And then many sort of perverse twists and ways with kind of the refound scarves. And those things look really radical and, you know, Dada-like, and, you know, quite revolutionary in terms of the history of precious, you know, Paris fashion. I think it's always been, it turns the table on everything. It makes you question.
Would you guys agree with that, the idea that it does sort of make you question fashion?
Yeah, I think my entry point was the tabby-toe boot, and it was simultaneously quite grotesque and animal-like, and yet very beautiful. And it was an intriguing object that sort of made me want to know more about the house. That kind of love-hate thing has happened quite a lot for me with Margiela, actually. But yeah, powerful.
Yeah, I mean, my first experience of Margiela show was when I was a student, and we'd all gone over to Paris, and we'd gone into the depths of nowhere. We didn't have invitations. We waited for 2 hours, and Kylie, who was actually relatively unknown, was standing next to us in the queue. She got in and we didn't.
Oh no.
And made our trip all the way back. But I just think there's an amazing amount of wit. You know, there's a strength. It's witty, but it's not light. It's not kind of superfluous.
Yeah.
My first piece I bought was a butcher's apron, part of the series when he was just taking found garments and just remaking them. I wear it sometimes at college now, and the students are still saying, "What's that? Where's it?" You know, kind of. I think it's timeless in a way, but I love it. There's never been a hate moment for me.
And what does it mean to have a house, as we've all kind of implied, that is powerful, that makes you question fashion, that makes you question the systems? Is it very important to have that also showing it as part of haute couture? Because I think that impact is harder to make on a ready-to-wear runway with the pace, you know.
Yes, it is, isn't it? Because it's all part of this movement to reinvigorate couture. To have someone like that, or to have a house like that showing, it is a part of the reinvigoration. Just like denim, having denim on the haute couture catwalk is questioning and making you ask about haute couture's relevance. So yeah, it is important to have Margiela. And also Iris van Herpen was the other, those new shapes, very space agey, very, not the fairy tale princess at all. If anything, it's like Alien, and it's fantastic to see that kind of stuff. And I think it sounds like haute couture really needs it as well.
And you were talking before we went live about the progression of the couture that you've seen. Just tell me a little bit about that in how sort of Margiela have been developing their couture and moving forward.
Well, I just think if you look back through the last 5 collections, this being the 5th, it just seems a very natural evolution. It feels like they're not thinking of one thing one season, another thing another season, and there's a lien that goes through all of them, and it feels like they've really stuck to the brand DNA, that they've really found what their voice and what they're trying to say in fashion, and it's just almost getting more and more artistic and creative, and I don't know, just creating these really strong standalone pieces, but that feel like they haven't suddenly decided, everything's got to be stripy or pink or dotty, or that they've just worked through in a very gentle but quite serious way to say this is what we think.
And what do you think that they are trying? You mentioned sort of brand DNA and what they're trying to say. What do you think the house is trying to say now? Because obviously it's not under Martin anymore; it's the studio who are doing. What is the message of Margiela? What is the codes of that house?
I think they're doing. I don't know whether he'll know, but I think they're doing a really good job of channeling him. Yeah. I think the people that have been working with him have heard his voice again and again and again, and it's almost like a ghost in the room. I think they're not moving away from kind of his serious aesthetic of actually trying to say something about fashion and ask people to look again. Rather than just taking things at face value, that he builds into his designs kind of a question.
It's interesting to me, Harriet, what you said as well, because I do think, when you mentioned how revolutionary the early shows were and how incredible the impact of them was, because I think it's almost, you forget how big an impact Martin Margiela has had on the fashion system and how many designers have been inspired by it. And it's not to say that it doesn't feel as impressive anymore, but it's now, some of the ideas he had that were so exciting are quite widely held ideas now, and I think it is. Do you all see that a huge influence on other designers?
I think there are those things that are quintessentially Margiela, which are deconstruction, frayed edges, the sort of bricolage, trompe-l'oeil, sort of quite emotive storytelling within pieces as well, and you look at some of those aspects, and those are widely disseminated throughout so many different, down to high street menswear, or just it's accepted part of how we view what fashion can be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It's in terms of, I think people do view Margiela as a very luxurious label, and it shows. We've talked a lot about this idea of luxury being about quietness or label-less things, and it's interesting that something that is about sort of refound things, reclaimed things, can be seen as luxurious. And I think it shows the different ways that people approach what they think luxury is. They perhaps want something that is special or one-off or discreet, rather than wanting something that's particularly opulent. I think that's quite an interesting thing as well, just in terms of how women are shopping. Do you think there's a change to that, Belle? Because obviously you write for sort of women who are going out and buying things. Do you think that there is a desire to buy things that are
better made?
Yeah, better made, exactly.
I was thinking that you couldn't get further from fast fashion. I think there's definitely than haute couture, could you? Really.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of the values embedded in fast fashion, we really need to question them. The idea of using the cheapest possible labour, the cheapest possible fabrics. It's very ethically and environmentally damaging in so many ways. And I think there is oddly, you could argue that haute couture is very ethical because it treats the people who create the clothing very well. It really values their craft. You get a piece that you will wear not 2 or 3 times. You will wear it through a lifetime.
Exactly.
So I think we're definitely looking at luxury as well in a different way. But I love that ethical aspect to couture that people don't think about that much. Yeah.
Is there enough? We talked a lot about this as well because we've had Fashion Revolution Day quite recently.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Do you think more people are aware of ethical fashion?
I really hope so.
Yeah.
I really hope so. And I, personally, definitely, I've been through my Primark phase, but I won't spend that kind of, like £5 or £6 on a t-shirt anymore. I'd rather spend a lot more on a piece that I know has been well made in good conditions, So I really hope it's becoming more widespread. That
it's difficult though, isn't it? Because fashion always struggles. We've all talked about the pricing element, but it always struggles with this idea that buying expensive clothes is somehow wasteful and unethical. When actually, buying cheap clothes, it's a difficult thing.
Yeah. But that's also something which has happened in the last 50 years. If you go back, 60 years, the 1950s. Because fabric was much shorter supply, people bought one coat for the winter and it lasted, or it might last 10 years. It's our attitude which has got faster and faster and faster and faster, and it goes across the board. We're actually consuming far too much, and we need to just and ask young people to actually open their eyes and look again and look at the cost and say, actually, maybe you should not throw that t-shirt away. Maybe you should wear it again, or change it, or
do you
cut the sleeves off, or it's education. We did the Fashion Revolution Day with all of the students on my course and had a fantastic response. They all created photo shoots and posted them up and got their friends involved, and it's getting everybody, particularly the consumers, the people that buy clothes, to open their eyes and to actually see.
Because I think it was Karen Franklin who on Fashion Revolution Day, she was saying, because she was there at the beginning of fast fashion, where suddenly, all of this clothing was available to all of these people, and it was like, and she actually said, at the beginning I viewed it as the democratization of fashion, and now she said she could never have suspected what the implications would have been for people on the other side of the world, even perhaps for how we consume and understand fashion. It's just like, I don't like it, I'll chuck it. And it's great to know the colleges are so on board. I know that they are actually, not just CSM but LCF.
It's interesting as well, you kind of mentioned this with cutting the sleeves off a t-shirt, but do you think part of the problem, and it's interesting again given what Margiela do, is that people just don't make stuff anymore? The idea of taking something old and turning it into something different, it just doesn't seem to be aspirational in young people's mind. I know there's vintage had a moment, but it was very much that you went to a vintage shop and you bought, the work was done for you, you weren't kind of having to sort of put any effort in.
Yeah, but that's kind of true of the whole of modern society. I mean, we're so now removed from production, aren't we, that we actually can't conceive of, making stuff in the same way. We just expect it to be delivered to us. I mean, I can't sew to save my life, but it's a skill I'd like. But I think that's symptomatic of everything at the moment. We don't know where our food comes from, we don't know where our clothing comes from. We just absorb and consume. So I'm sounding really cross.
It's interesting though, to be own sewing machines. I haven't got one, and I think that was such a part of like my mother's. Everybody had sewing machines.
Everyone has a sewing box as well. It's such a normal thing. I don't have I have like a tiny hotel sewing kit that I stole on my travels. It's quite depressing. But I guess that's what's interesting about a house like Margiela, because it makes, I think Margiela is loved by young people. Even just at SHOWstudio, if we put a Margiela image on our social networks, it's incredibly popular. It gets liked and it gets shared. So it's obviously a house that people are identifying with, and you wonder if that's going to have a trickle-down effect where they go, actually, no, I could do that. I could go and buy several old pieces of fabric and make it.
Well, there, we should do it. We should do a workshop live and get people
that's
to,
great.
We should solve the problem. And get people say, you want to make this? Okay, go out, bring this, and then we'll have some dummies and
get them to do it.
Because it feels a bit difficult, even when you say just cut the sleeves off something. Well, I have actually cut the sleeves off something, and they looked absolutely awful at the end of it, and I ruined a t-shirt. Well, but it's a skill that we can learn, definitely.
Do you see it with students though? Do you find that if they really love a brand or they love a collection, do they ever sort of try and fashion their own version of it, or is it all just down to styling?
I think very much they're pushing for their own version of things. So rather than looking at a designer, they're looking at their own inspiration and wanting to make something amazing from, some grasses in Africa, or a piece of pottery from China, or could be anything. I don't think they're quite as desperate for what everybody else is doing as probably we used to be. You know, we wanted to be making things. I mean, one of the things we do at college is run a sewing club so that people can come along and sew for pleasure, because
ordinary people?
Students.
Oh, sorry.
We're so excited.
You can come along.
Open it up.
Yeah,
we
should
sign you in.
SHOWstudio
Yeah,
sewing club.
we'll do a little sewing club. It's fine. See me afterwards. Because when I was at college 20 years ago, everybody made all the time, because you were going out clubbing and you had to have something new to wear every Friday night, you know, and you wanted something exciting that nobody else had. And there wasn't consumer fashion like there is now. You couldn't run down but the students don't do that anymore, so we kind of try and encourage them to come along on a Thursday night and just make something for fun.
It's interesting actually that you talk about that, because everyone at SHOWstudio is really bored of me talking about this because I was so excited by it. But I've been spending a bit of time with Kim Jones from Vuitton, who has that amazing collection of archive stuff, you know, old Lee Bowery and Rachel Ogburn, and it's absolutely incredible because you look at it and it's not just about surface level, I want something cool to wear on a Friday night, but the techniques that they had, because they were making stuff with such frequency, were absolutely incredible. You know, the pattern cutting and some of it is amazing, and you just think, you know, imagine getting that many skills from having such an exciting social life, whereas now, you know, people just go and buy a t-shirt to wear on a Friday. You know, there's not that same focus on. Very few people would become a designer through always making clothes for themselves on a Saturday night. You know, it's much more sort of about ambition and channeling yourself into a student system. There's none of I don't think making fashion is as tied to your social life as it used to be. You know, it's interesting.
Maybe because it's more easily available. I'm sure I have a friend who said she used to have a uniform and then she'd leave the house to go to school, and then round the corner she'd quickly sew up the hem and you know, do this and then quickly customise and then go to school.
On the way. But customising, it's interesting because I feel like that had a bit of a moment about sort of maybe like 10 years ago, you know, whereas that big focus on, you know, badges and stickers, and a lot of young girls magazine were really pushing, you know, customise your clothes. And that's kind of gone as well, you know, even people, I think even if you saw someone on the tube now who'd covered their jacket in badges or something, you'd kind of look twice. It's an odd thing to see. Everything is very as it comes in the shop, you know, you're not used to someone having ripped off the sleeves or anything like that. It's seen as quite...
Or it's ready ripped for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's ready ripped.
Yeah.
I actually ripped these myself.
Did you really? Very well ripped.
I genuinely did.
Very well
I was
ripped.
getting the train from Florence to Milan
and
I ripped, one of them happened by accident, and then I spent the train journey ripping them myself. So yeah, that's me, customising. Practically Margiela. Shall we have a look at what they've done for this season? I'm really proud of that actually.
Yeah, no, it looks really good.
I did it with a pair of keys as well. Yeah. So I can give you some information about.
Well, you can read off the fabrics now, can't you?
Yes, I can. So just to give you a little bit of information about the collection, the notes say the collection revisits a collective memory of haute couture, disassembled and reassembled in strata of periods, iconic places and images. It is recomposed like an exquisite corpse. Relics that have been transformed in homage and archetypes with arrays and recoloured lines comprise a collection that blends makeshift clothing with a couture atelier's exercise in perfection. What couture usually conceals is revealed. Samples and scraps of fabric are salvaged and re-embroidered to become ornamental. The clothing's quest and the clothing itself are superimposed. So is this interesting idea of the process of couture being seen as something very beautiful, which I think is something that I've spotted kind of slightly across all the couture shows, you know, seeing sort of tours on the runway, and I think that's quite interesting, this idea of celebrating the process. You know, a lot of people on these panels say, what I loved about reporting on the couture was when I looked inside a garment, it was just as beautiful as on the inside as the out, and it seems like houses themselves are sort of celebrating that. So the first look that we've got, it's a white shirt cut from cotton, and it's decorated with brooches and buttons, and the production time on it was 22 hours, and the buttons and the brooches are in gilded bronze, which is as thin as a nail, as high as a tower, flat as a pancake, and as long as a giraffe.
Is that in the show notes?
Yes, it is. Great. No, I just made that up myself. No, it is in the show notes. But I think it's interesting also to reveal, you know, how long is spent on pieces.
Yeah,
and to interject, I have a student who, as part of Fashion Revolution, went to China and went to a factory and was told the time it takes to make a pair of jeans sewing is 42 seconds.
Are you serious? 42 seconds?
That is fast fashion.
42 seconds. 2 minutes 20 for a day dress.
Oh, that just freaks me out.
So tell us again how long that took.
Yeah.
How long did that take?
That took 22 hours.
Yeah. Which is short.
That is short.
It's really short.
Really short. Because Because if you think Valentino, even in the ready-to-wear, have done dresses that were like
So
600 hours, crazy amounts of time. But every look has a production time. So look 2 was 70 hours, look 3, 74 hours. I think there's something quite lovely about that.
Yeah.
And are these vintage fabrics? Does it go into
it says that they're all
the
of them.
jacquards?
Some of them are sort of so look 2 that we're seeing. It's a palm leaf and flowers motif, which is reinterpreted from an 18th century style lumpus.
So when you say reinterpreted, does that mean they've used the original? Or
I presume they've sort of used the original as a influence.
Okay.
But I think, you know, they always say that a lot of it is stuff that's been found around the world. Some of it's new, some of it's old.
So their criteria for choosing fabrics, if it's new, that will be largely a visual and aesthetic response, and then if it's old,
it's because there's something intriguing about it. And there's obviously, I know, for like look 3, and we're seeing it in look 4 as well, that amazing sort of needle embroidery that we've come to know them for, so incredible beads and glass tubes, and which is absolutely beautiful. Do we like what we're seeing so far?
Yeah. I mean, very much so. I'm finding the extremely high slit difficult to imagine wearing, but I mean, it's beautiful, and the fabrics are fantastic.
But I suppose it goes back to what you were saying, Harriet, about this idea of the couture client would probably come in and say, oh, I love this, can you put a skirt on the underside as well? You know, sort of that kind of a...
And I think the fabrics are so rich, it would feel quite refreshing to wear such a challenging shape. Particularly if you go back, the yellow dress, I think you would, you know, if you were somewhere wearing that, you would just feel amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's incredibly opulent, isn't it? But it's opulent in a kind of quiet way. There's something, you know, they've talked about before how in the notes that the prince inspired by like Louis XV. So there's that kind of period of opulence, which is interesting. But that kind of wallpaper-esque look, it feels quite new. It's not something, you know...
Well, the shapes are very modern, aren't they? I mean,
yeah.
They're not the traditional couture fairy tale princess at all.
These sequins look lovely.
Yeah, really, really beautiful.
Yeah. They're so big and bold.
I love the way in couture you can't really talk in terms of trends as well. You can't say, oh, everyone's doing sport luxe, or you can't do, you know, it's really...
It's about the house codes.
Yeah, and particularly with Margiela, it almost depends on what they found and what they're using, and they allow the material to dictate.
And I find their references into it's interesting you say what they found and what they're using, because even like number 8 in the notes it says a Paul Poiret coat, so you know they're quite open with kind of how they found stuff, both whether it's their fabrics but also like in the ideas, which I think is quite interesting.
So that's an actual Paul Poiret coat?
Yeah, it says a Paul Poiret coat, probably part of a costume for an Oriental themed party given by Denise and Paul Poiret, is restored and fastened with a cotton boldock, and it's worn as an ensemble with a makeshift skirt embroidered with old coins.
That's something that you always dream you might turn up at one of the flea markets.
Yeah, exactly.
But where on earth they got that from, I have no idea.
And they spent 16 hours on the coat, 26 hours on the skirt.
Oh, so they're actually coins, not sequins.
Yeah, they're coins, they're old French francs and other old currencies.
It's a nice play on the value of couture.
It really is, that's very funny.
Wear your money.
Yeah.
And also I think it's quite interesting, you see so many prints, that, you know, coin prints and really graphic prints, you know, Dolce did the coin, so it's actually to just put coins on is very... And it goes back to what we were saying about this idea of customization, you know, when you're a kid, you're sticking pasta on things, sticking coins on things, it's quite a kind of primal way to customise your clothes.
But it also shows the skill of the house, and I love that idea that you're wearing your money. But also, because it's not easy to put coins on chiffon without getting all sorts of stretching, and I can't even imagine how they're doing that, so... You know, that is phenomenal.
It says coins sourced in various dressing table drawers and from flea markets across Paris and Brussels. So it's really romantic, this idea of sort of... Those are my favourite, I think, those coin pieces so far.
Now that I know that they're coins, they are.
Yeah, it changes how you see them, doesn't it?
Very much so.
So 10 is meant to be an echo of a Van Gogh painting.
How many hours?
That one was 57 hours for the dress and 6 hours for the skirt. Mixed needle embroidery with mother of pearl, half and whole glass tubes, sequins and silk chiffon.
What are these in 11 and 12?
11 is 3-dimensional embroidery depicting a blue lobster, and it's worn with a shawl over a couture bustier, One is an ensemble with a makeshift skirt, again embroidered with the old coins. As you can see, 89 hours for the top, 26 hours for the skirt.
Where did they get the lobster from? Do they make the lobster themselves?
Yeah, it just says it's depicting a blue lobster, so I presume
they've come up with that one.
And the red lobster.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, if they're nodding to Poirot, maybe this is their nod to Schiaparelli, maybe they're doing a bit of a sort of homage to couture.
And the models are still masked, but that's probably the first time I've seen
the faces.
Yeah, it's much less of a focus on that really covered face, isn't it? So 14 is quite special because it's a 20s era panel dress that was altered into a children's party costume in the 30s, and it's been disassembled and restored on a frame, and that's how we're seeing it there.
Wow. So whoever's doing the buying for them is managing to get all the history. They're not just picking up at a flea market.
That is the dream job, isn't it? Imagine if that was your job. You had to go and find all the things for Margiela. Oh my God, that is really what I want to do. That would be absolutely amazing.
They must have very, very deep pockets.
Well, I don't know, because it's interesting, because 15 is just an aluminium I love you party balloon. So I think there's that real mix of high and low, you know.
Yeah. That's great.
I really, really love that. But I think that's interesting. It goes back to what we were talking about before, of what's valuable, what's not. You know, old coin. You know, you said wearing your money on your sort of on your clothes.
On your body,
Yeah, it's that interesting idea of what is valuable and what's not. And also, I think what's valuable to other people, because I think it's interesting to me. You know, child's costume and I love you balloon. They're pieces that really would have stories. You know, a special child's outfit has so many memories with it. That I love you balloon was probably bought for someone from somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, and I like that idea of that's just as valuable as something really expensive because it's got so much emotion and story in it.
Yeah, something you might have put in your secret box.
Exactly. Yeah, your box under your bed.
I love it. Yeah, and it's sort of bringing together different worlds, different places, different feelings, different times. It's very moving, really, isn't it? That sense of bringing stuff together.
It reminds me, have you been to the Museum of Innocence in Istanbul? You know, where it's kind of this idea and it's all these objects of a love story, and the collection is just filled with kind of tat in a way, you know, just tons and tons of things.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of this in the sense, there's all these objects that inform your emotions and your life. It's interesting. Number 15 is definitely my favourite.
And where do the fabrics come from in 16?
16 is a dress made of embroidery samples.
Okay.
So again, that's interesting, because this idea of celebrating the process of couture, and it's interesting when you look at 16 actually, because you wonder, you know, if the dress had just been done in one of those swatches of embroidery, how you know, you'd expect it on Chanel, you'd expect it at Dior, whereas here it's kind of that celebration. And the coat is all different sort of cashmere samples as well, yeah. And again, what we're seeing in 17, it's all different sort of several sections of lace, which are all from sort of 1800 through to 1920. And the coat is a reinterpretation of a piece from the House's archive from 1994.
Oh, we've got a mask in number 20.
Oh, I love this. Sorry, number 19. It's these notes are like a gift. It's a jacket, and it bears an inscription on the back which says, "To the best father in the world, from your loving son Herbert, 1949, Tokyo, Japan." So it's been restored and lined, and it's worn over sort of the bustier and the skirt. It seems to me like the collection, it's about sort of, it seems to be about love, doesn't it? You know, that the I love you balloon is quite an obvious, but even just like your love for a child or your love for your father, or little bits that you found that you love, which obviously is something that kind of infuses all of the work because it's all found materials, but it seems to be coming through even more so.
Yeah, it's a sort of sentimental journey, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And caring.
Yeah, caring, that's really true. It goes back to the slow fashion thing we were saying, it's caring where things come from.
These colours are wonderful in these.
Yeah, really, really
looks.
wonderful.
And it's using the designer's eye to elevate things by the choice and the how they're put together. You're elevating things to a higher level.
Which
again,
is
saying, look again.
Yeah, and why do you see something as like, luxury or expensive or worthwhile, and why something else not? So these 3 dresses are all part of a, they're cut from Japanese sort of souvenir bomber jackets, which are from the 50s. And then the veils are sort of Fabergé egg veils. And the bomber jackets were sourced at a garage sale in New York and from antique dealers in London. So really everything is pulled from sort of all over the world, which is interesting.
And it really is upcycling at its, haute couture level.
And also I think this idea of the bomber jacket being used as an evening dress, we talked about, Margiela, you said before that it's powerful, there's an impact to it, and I think, the bomber jacket's a real symbol of kind of, it's quite an aggressive item to wear, but then that turns into an evening gown. I think it sums up the house quite nicely.
I'm intrigued by the decision to allow the models' faces to show as well. I don't know how conscious that is.
I wonder if it is because it feels like a very emotional collection, a collection very much about caring, as we said. There's something to see people.
There's something quite alienating as well about having the face covered, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think they originally did it to take away the identity of the model, but it's such a statement in its own right.
And number 5, there's something of a kind of 1970s Yves Saint Laurent silhouette about that. The slight undulation.
So the brocade on number 5, that's sourced from an antique dealer in Brussels, for example. So it really is kind of all over the world.
And they've been playing and having fun, it looks like. It looks like it's been quite a joyful process.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm overestimating.
In my head, the studio is just people sat there, and then someone comes in, they're like, guys, look what I found, and then they're all really excited.
Yay!
I know.
What can we do with it?
I know, it's so exciting. It's like the best kind of show and tell at school. It's amazing.
I did read an interview by someone who'd actually managed to visit the house in Paris, Dean Mayo Davis, managed to get in. It sounded like everyone was it was quite hive-like, but everyone was very nice. Yeah, all dressed in their white coats.
I just love Look 11. I think that's...
Yeah, it's beautiful.
What I find really interesting is everything feels quite, even though there's so much stuff and there's so much eclectic sort of things pulled, there's a real simplicity to it. Even just, the back that we just saw, if you scroll back a little bit, which is just that beautiful, tie.
Yeah.
There is something very clean and very modern about it, which is interesting. Because in a way, this is a lot more opulent and a lot more detailed and a lot more heavily embellished than what we've seen at some of the other houses, but it still feels really, really modern.
It's a very elegant silhouette.
Yeah.
Yes, they're quite long and lean. I like the idea of the tie as well. It's making very obvious how something is held. It's not trying to conceal anything. It's like...
And it looks like they've used the restrictions of the pieces that they've had to start with to create the shape rather than just cut into them.
So we're impressed then. We seem to like what we've seen.
Yeah, I'm a bit speechless because it's kind of what I thought it might be like. I mean, they've stayed so true to the DNA that you kind of think, well, it's all incredibly comfortable and wonderful and fantastic. I don't know quite else what to say about it.
It's so rich with storytelling and emotion.
Yeah.
It's quite wonderful on that level.
And I think what's interesting is the storytelling is in the pieces, because it's not storytelling in the sort of obvious fashion way where there's a big set and you know what the theme is and it builds and the music all ties in. Yeah, exactly. It's not about, as you say, it's not about characters. The pieces tell the story. But it's also this interesting idea of what gives fashion its worth. Is something valuable because you bought it for a lot of money, or is it valuable because you've had it for 10 years and you remember you wore it on your wedding, or you wore it on your first date with the person you end up marrying, or you wore it, at your child's christening and what gives clothes their value. I think that's a really interesting thing.
That's definitely a question they're asking with the collections.
Should more couture be like this, do we think? Slightly less removed? Because it's interesting, going right back to what you said at the start, Belle, is that sometimes when you look at couture it feels very lofty and it feels very separate from you.
It does, doesn't it? And it also feels mainly designed for the red carpet, whereas I'd be surprised to see too much of that on the red carpet. Should more houses be doing it? I mean, I think each house needs their own identity in order to create all the diversity of, you know, expression that we need to see. But it definitely emphasises what an important place Margiela has in the landscape.
Would you agree with that, Harriet, that it's so important to have a house sort of questioning all the things that this is questioning?
Yeah, and I think also this is, you know, such a beautiful, strong collection, but it's also, to be able to do that, the positioning of haute couture has to be in a very strong place, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And there definitely is a new generation of customers coming into the fold, and way more interest in what used to be quite an, you know, such an esoteric and elite side of fashion.
And it's making it accessible to lots of people who might just look at it and think, right, I'm going to be really inspired by this. I'm going to find my pieces and my stories, and I'm going to cobble something together. It's not going to be the same. Of course it's not going to be the same, but it's a very inspiring collection, I think.
Yeah, it makes you want to go and collect all the things that are important to you and kind of probably be a disaster.
Let's not forget the master tailoring that goes behind this.
Next time you see you have like bits hanging off and you're completely mad. Well, should we give them a round of applause to round things off? Because it's a very joyful collection to see. Thanks, gang.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.